We are studying in Paul's letter to Philippi, so if you would take a copy of the scriptures and turn there, that would be a good thing. And we will look at a section of this text here in just a few minutes. There's a phenomenon in history of battles being fought after a war was over. Mostly just for lack of communication. In the 30 Years' War in the 1600s, the Battle of Prague was fought after that treaty ending that war had been negotiated. And it's the means by which Sweden carried home most of their national library at the time, and a lot of treasures that still remain in the Swedish National Museum, which means it's hard to be in the European Union for a lot of historical reasons, because everybody's got everybody else's stuff from all the centuries past. The Battle of New Orleans in the War of 1812 was actually fought 2 weeks after the War of 1812 was over. The Civil War had another battle 3 days after that war ended in South Texas. And they had telegraphs even then. And there were hundreds of Japanese soldiers who fought in the Pacific Islands, hundreds of Pacific Islands, still out on those islands, fighting long after World War II, after their country had surrendered. And in fact, the last one that we know of finally surrendered and stopped the war in 1974, about 30 years later, because he hadn't got the news. And they had, fortunately, his commanding officer from the war 30 years prior was still alive, long retired, and they had to bring him and tell this guy, it's over already. And so he finally came home. And we think to ourselves, well, technology could have saved so many lives. We have this ability to communicate instantly everywhere on the planet right now. The question, though, with technology is always, when you bring it into the sphere of being a Jesus follower and living a biblical lifestyle, what does technology do for you, and what does it do against you? And the question I want to bring into our sphere today is does technology have an effect on God trying to build our character? Does it do we stay away from God because of our technology, or has it improved the character of human beings? Our fantastic technology makes the world easier. It makes it far more efficient. It makes it much more profitable. But it also, along with many other things, often makes us think that we do not need good character as long as we have good technology. What do I have to be nice or good for? I can get whatever I want, you see. And there is that element in our world very strongly today, what I call high-tech barbarians in this country. People remind me of the people I read about in Genesis 4, the ancestors, or the descendants rather, of Cain. High-tech barbarians. They developed all the technologies, but they were away from the presence of God. And so if we live in this world with technological solutions only, what's the effect on our character? Even Richard Dawkins, who has made his fame by, he started out as a scientist, but he's written books that are really, in actuality, philosophy books. And he has pushed his atheism out into the public sphere, saying that following Jesus, especially Christianity, and other religions as well, has been a great impediment on the development of humankind. Well, now he's come out in the last month ago or so and said, when people don't have any belief in God at all, it's like they just feel free to do bad things. David Berlinski says of Richard Dawkins, he is a crummy philosopher. Berlinski's way over my head, though, so I'll stick with Bugs Bunny. What a maroon, huh? Who didn't know that? So in our text today, in this great letter that Paul wrote to Philippi, he's given us this majestic hymn about King Jesus that we recited here just a few minutes ago. How he came and set aside his heavenly conveniences and privileges and took on the form of a slave, even unto death, and God raised him and exalted him, seated him in the heavenly places, so that at his name, every knee will bow. Paul has given us this, and then he says, and so I want you to have that same attitude. Let God be the one that raises you up. Humble yourself to do what you are called to do, and let God raise you up. He says, have that same attitude in you that was in the anointed King, Jesus. And then he says, when you do that, you'll shine like stars. And then he comes to this place where he gives us two particular examples. And usually these are the kind of sections that we kind of, okay, yeah. He was just taking care of kind of business at the time. But they're very important points. They are exact illustrations. These are the illustrations that are actually in Paul's view. And so he uses them to show us what this attitude like Jesus looks like. These humble servants who have the attitude of King Jesus. And what struck me as I read through this was how low or no tech their lives were. They just didn't have the technology that we have. And so communication was very labored and hard. And so it came down to this, that these low-tech solutions, these no-tech solutions were resolved only with King Jesus' character. That's how you work with no technology. And so let's capture this in this simple saying that God builds our character with teamwork. If I could get the first slide up, please. God builds our character with teamwork, as in one another. And so it's always kind of the opposite of the way we think of it. God uses somebody else's need to be our call. Your need is someone else's call. We don't like to be the ones who have a need. I don't want to be needy, and if I need something, I don't want people to know about it. Are you that way too? Yeah, absolutely. No, that's it. Garrison Keillor had a great story many years ago. He said there's something about that Scandinavian culture in Minnesota. He says, a lady rolls her station wagon over and over off the road and into the field, and people are rushing out to see what's going on. And he says, with her blood-stained finger on the window, the dirty window, she writes, okay. That's us. We're okay. But Paul is letting his need, his personal need, because he's in prison, he's letting his need be the call to someone else's life. And so talks about is committed to keeping Paul going. So let's look at the text. We're in chapter 2 and verse 19. Chapter 2 and verse 19. But I hope, Paul says, in the Lord, remember who the Lord is the King, but I hope in King Jesus to send Timothy to you soon, so that I too might be encouraged when I know the news about you. I have no one else like him, or I have no one else of like mind, who will genuinely care for you. If you're taking notes in your Bible at all, you might want to look at the word encouraged, or whatever your version says, and the word like-minded. They're a matched set. The word in Greek for mind or soul, but it's just talking about our mind here, is psyche. And we get the word psyche from it. So we have a whole bunch of psyche words. My pastor is a psychopath, whatever. All those psyche words are mind words. And he says, the word for encourage, or that gets translated encouraged, is eusuke, like we say eulogy, which is good words. And then he uses the word, that same word here when he describes Timothy, when he says like mind. Isosuke. We know iso, like isolated. Anyway, singular mind and good mind. And so this is all relational. He's saying this stuff is coming from within us. These are not technological ideas. I want to be encouraged when I know the news about you, and I have no one else who is of like mind like Timothy for me, who will genuinely care for you. He goes on, everyone seeks their own interest, just like he'd been talking about before in chapter 1. They seek their own interests, not those of the anointed King Jesus, Christ Jesus, Messiah Jesus. But you know Timothy's proven character. But he didn't have a cell phone. He didn't have a smartphone. Doesn't need one to have good character. But you know Timothy's proven character, that he served with me in spreading the good news like a son with his father. Therefore, I hope to send him immediately as soon as I see how things go with me. He's got a trial coming up. And I trust in the Lord that soon I too will come myself. We all need encouragement. Paul was looking for some encouragement. And he's a tough guy. He really is. But he had a network of people that kept him going. And that's a very interesting study. And you can do that with these computer programs that are Bible study programs. I've been working in BibleGateway.com for years because it's free. Some of you I know have gotten the Logos programs. And you can... my English language concordance has not been used for decades because it's just so easy to do that. I would encourage you to look at the ends of Paul's letters especially, and in the book of Acts. And when you run into a name, just a person that's running around with Paul or that he knows, see where else it shows up. And you find that those names in the book of Acts show up at the end of his letters, because these are the people that keep him going. They're the ones that he's encouraged by and that he encourages as well. Paul was not a safe or easy person to be around. I took my BibleGateway.com little feature there, and I plugged in the word uproar that I found in the NIV translation in the book of Acts. And I just said, how many times does the word uproar appear in that translation in the book of Acts? It shows up 7 times. And guess whose name is in the same sentence with every single one of them? Paul. So Timothy had quite a job on his hands being around Paul. But he says that we're close. He's like my son. And I think that probably Timothy had the experience of having to physically carry Paul to safety at times, like when he was left for dead, stoned in the street. I mean, they'd just taken up rocks and tried to kill the man. And so the believers came out and got him. And one of Timothy's jobs was to get Paul out of town before he was actually killed. So they had this kind of relationship. But Timothy was very different than Paul. Paul has to encourage him. He wrote 2 letters to Timothy that we have in our New Testament. And he knows that Timothy doesn't have as strong a health as Paul does, even though Paul had his own health problems. But he encourages Timothy to be bold and strong and not let people harass him on account of his relative youth. He says, you have the truth, so being young is not something that someone should hold against you. So anyway, he wanted to send Timothy, so Timothy's there with Paul in this house arrest situation, apparently. He wanted to send Timothy to find out if his letter that he had sent with Epaphroditus earlier, he wanted to send him to find out if the letter was helping the Philippians with their situation. And he wants to come himself as well. You see, all this is relational. He's talked about the King of Heaven being exalted most high, but when it gets down to it, how that works out is what we do for one another, encouraging one another. Taking care of one another. The expectation in those days was that when you said goodbye to somebody at your door and you watched them walk down the road or ride their donkey, you might never see them again. Or it might be a long, long time before the message you sent with them came back to you in answer. Low tech, but it built certain things into your character. You had to carry on with your life before you had that information. We have instant information. I just look on Google and it just tells me whatever I want to know. Not so until very recently in history. And so think about the kind of depth to your friendships that you would have if you knew that this person you were saying goodbye to, you might never see them again. It's very likely that you might not. And you still had to make decisions about what to do in life before you had the information they were going to bring to you. Well, we still have to make decisions in this life, because for all our technology, the thing we cannot do is be more than one place at once. We cannot be 5 minutes from now. We have to be in right now. And so we have to make decisions based on what we know right now. And we still need one another just as much as Paul and Timothy and Epaphroditus needed one another. And that is why our mission statement for our congregation is to be disciples and make disciples. Well, the question follows, okay, how do we do that? Well, the way we do that is we worship, we connect, and we serve. Worship, connect, serve. Worship is living your life in such a way that hymn that we rehearsed today about Jesus, the King of Heaven, and how he humbled himself, that is what we live to. We have that attitude everywhere we go. And we bring it together here on Sundays. That is worship. Connection is what Paul and Timothy and Epaphroditus and all the people at Philippi were experiencing together. They were connecting together. They were encouraging together. They were keeping one another going. And so we do that through our small groups. We have a number of them meeting. And if you are interested, I would love to talk to you about that. We're always looking for an opportunity to start a new group, because there's people, we're just not like, we're not like a dozen eggs. We got our places and we just plug them in right here and there. We communicate with one another in funny ways, in funny shapes. And so there are just certain groups of people that join together. Shall we try the pulpit mic? There we go. Okay. There are certain groups that just naturally stay with one another. And you know what? That's okay. We always have this theoretical ideas, well, everybody should get to know everybody. Everybody's not going to get to know everybody. And that's just the way it is. There are some people we're closer to than others, and that's okay. Paul had his people he worked with. Doesn't mean he didn't love anyone else, but he worked with the people that God sent to him. We have mom to moms. Those are a special group of people who have special circumstances in their life. We have one of our small groups is broken up into running partners. So we're broken up into a little bit smaller groups that work a little differently. All kinds of things. Connection is very important. Are you connected in this body? That is the question. And if you are not, you need to be. Now, I would like to come and get you and say to you, hey, this is what the deal is. I'm saying it now. Part of your responsibility of being a follower of Jesus in this group is to make sure that you're connected. And so you have to speak up or find that group that works for you. And so we are absolutely happy to invent a new group. They have all kinds of different sizes and shapes. But be connected. That's where your source of encouragement will be from. God works through His Holy Spirit through our network. I just have days when I'm just like, I'm a wreck. I don't get it. And someone comes up to me and says something. And I go, oh, that was a message. That was a message from God. I get it. They had no idea, usually. That's how God works. So your need is someone else's call. Correspondent to that, your need is someone else, or your suffering is someone else's call. Can I get the last part of that slide up, please? Your suffering is someone else's call. And let's look at what we find out about this other character, Epaphroditus. Verse 25, Paul goes on. But I wanted to send Timothy, but I can't turn him loose yet because I need him. But I thought it necessary to send to you Epaphroditus. Now, Epaphroditus comes from Philippi. He's one of their congregation. But Paul says he's my brother and co-worker and fellow soldier, as well as your messenger and aid or servant to my need. For he was longing for you all and was troubled because you heard that he was sick. He certainly was sick, near unto death. But God had mercy on him, and not only on him, but also on me, so that I would not have sorrow upon sorrow. Therefore, I have sent him with special urgency. He delivered this letter, so that when you see him again, you might rejoice, be joyful, and that I might be less worried about you, worried about him. Who's worried about you, worried about him. You see how that they're all connected. So, verse 29, welcome him in the Lord with all joy, and hold men like him in high regard, because he came near to death for the work of the anointed King, Messiah, Christ, risking his life to make up for what was lacking in your service to me. In other words, you couldn't be there, so he carried out what your good intention for me was fulfilled in him. So Epaphroditus is mentioned twice in this letter to Philippi, and his name appears nowhere else in the Bible. Now Timothy, the other character, he's a road warrior with Paul, and his name is mentioned 25 times in the scripture. But Paul says of this fellow who's just a local guy, a local regular person like most of us, he says of him, he is my brother. He is my co-worker in the gospel. He is a co-soldier. You see, they're all surrounded by the Praetorian guards. They've got that picture in front of them. And then he says, he's your messenger. Well, the word there is, he's your apostle. Just like I'm an apostle. He is a sent one, sent by you to me. And then the word aid or servant. Interesting word. It's a religious word. It describes someone like a priest who would do a service, who would bring a sacrifice and make a sacrifice on behalf of others in a temple. And so this is how he describes him. And he uses this word. Look in verse 25. What does your translation say? Verse 25. Who is your messenger, whom you sent to take care of my needs. Okay, he calls him an aid in this translation. And he uses the same word down in verse 30. What was lacking in your service. And again, it's that religious word of someone doing something, a priest in the temple making a sacrifice. The point is this. Well, let me just describe what Epaphroditus was likely doing. He was probably carrying money for Paul so that Paul could have food while he was in this arrest, in this prison situation. And you didn't travel alone when you were bringing money, so Epaphroditus came with some other fellows from the church there at Philippi, and they probably had, daggers and short swords and whatever else. And Epaphroditus apparently got sick on the way. And so when they came, they were staying with him while he was sick, but they really needed to get back home. And so Paul sent them back home, and then eventually sent Epaphroditus home. Well, they brought the news back that he was sick and almost died. And so that's where the low tech comes in. You got to walk home. It's a long way. Paul uses this phrase, close to death or near unto death, twice. He's already used it in our hymn, talking about Jesus, who came and humbled himself unto death, near unto death, and even death on the cross. And so Paul is thinking in some very religious categories here. This isn't just he almost died because we couldn't get him to the clinic on time. Paul is making some spiritual meaning out of this, which was a little bit of a surprise to me. I hadn't really seen that in this passage before. And what he's getting at is this. He says to us in many places, live your lives, do your work as unto the Lord. And he's saying Epaphroditus was suffering on behalf of the work of the King, Messiah, Jesus. Well, he just got sick. No, Paul says he was doing it as unto the Lord. The point is this: we all have difficulties in our lives. And so if you are living, if your life is an act of worship, if you are out there doing whatever it is you do, whether it's raising kids, whether it's being in a job, whether it's whatever, if you are doing it as unto the Lord, the difficulties you encounter along the way will be your suffering for the Lord. That's what he's saying. If you're living that way. Now, Peter says, if you get in trouble because you're being bad, you got it coming. Or if bad things happen to you because you got it coming, well, then you got it coming. But Paul is saying, if you're living your life unto the Lord, if you're putting yourself out there and stuff happens to you that you didn't anticipate or whatever, he says he's calling that suffering for the Lord. And Paul says, I'm so glad I was spared this sorrow upon sorrow. People were used to sorrow. We keep that away from us as far as we can in this life. But in that world, the average lifespan, when you were born, you had a 50-50 chance of making it to about 20. Now, because many, many people just never, they died in childbirth, or they died as little kids. And if you lived to be 10, then you had a 50-50 chance of being perhaps 50. Now, our friends in the Congo, Foley, and then in Burkina Faso, their average life expectancy is not much beyond that, maybe 59. And yet, they live their lives before the Lord as He asked them to do, without complaining, oh, I wish we had your health care, so my life, we're the ones that complain. I got to get this health care thing better so I can live to be 200. That's what we're like. But Paul says that God is bound up in this sickness, and they just had this expectation that their life wasn't going to be all that long. There was no such thing as a teenager. It was about when you're old enough to safely work with your dad, then you go and do that. When you're old enough to have your own children, you start thinking about getting married. Life was very different. Now, with modern medicine, we have this expectation of living longer, and so we have more time to think and to learn. And that's a good thing. But we also have more time when I don't know, I got to think about that. We don't decide. I'll think about Jesus later. We don't have to grow up. We can just skateboard and play computer games until we're 35 and then, try to run for Congress or something. Where's the character building in that? God says, however long you live, however short or long it is, do it for me. And that's what these people in this text are all about. Serving the Lord. Looking out for one another, doing the right thing, whatever the cost. And one another's need and one another's suffering was the call from the Lord to action. They were living for King Jesus. And that is what we are called to do. High tech, low tech, no tech, whatever tech. That's what we're called to do. Have His attitude. To do what we are called to do. When you do what you're called to do, you will, that is to say, you do the right thing at this time. Even though you don't know how it's going to turn out, you will be in the will of God. You can say confidently with Paul that he came close to death for the work of Messiah. Your difficulties, my difficulties, come to mean something when we are living an act of worship before the Lord. Let's thank Him.